Cool. Okay, we're live. Over to you.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Cool Story Bro. I'm Nick and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about plant medicine, the shamanic world, rites of passage, initiations, and how to integrate that into your everyday life. So I want to preface this conversation by saying that I don't consider myself to be a shaman in the common context of what you would consider that. I think there's a lot of people that claim to be things that they are not. I do have a decent amount of direct experience in different things, and I'm here to share what my direct knowledge is. And so, yeah, I mean, I spent my time in Peru, and but I'm definitely not claiming to be a Shipibo shaman or anything of that nature. I just wanted to open up the conversation and to talk about the different layers of kind of the plant medicine world, what I've learned, and like how I've integrated it into my everyday life, and kind of maybe some of the slippery slopes and the traps and pitfalls that people fall into. So yeah, I can kick this off by maybe giving like a bit of an overview about some of the plant medicines that I've done, and then if you guys want to talk about some of those more specifically, I can. So I've spent some months in Peru. I've been to Iquitos and the Amazon a few times. I've also been to the Andes. I've spent some time with the Shipibo. I've probably had about 55 or 60 ayahuasca ceremonies. I've worked with Kambo a little bit, the frog medicine. I've worked with acacia. I've done a bunch of sweat lodges in Colombia, and a couple of vision quests. What else? They're the main things probably. And then I've worked with people that specialize in integrating into your everyday life afterwards. So I would call him like more of a life coach or a personal development coach, or someone that's like well acquainted with the plant medicine world, that's been a facilitator at different centers that helps people in their process after they leave the different centers. So I've also believed that the process after the journeys is as important or more important than the actual journeys themselves, and it's something that's really overlooked. Because generally speaking, people can go there and they can have a life-changing experience, or what is seemingly a life-changing experience, and then they leave the jungle, or they leave wherever they're going, and they make a lot of big, sudden life changes. They feel like they've got a lot of big messages. They feel like they've now like awakened. Some people might even leave with like a God complex or a Messiah complex. They feel the need to share it with the rest of the world, which is, you know, somewhat natural. Like if people have had like a really big experience that they want to share with others. Other people can actually re-traumatize themselves. That's actually a conversation I was having today. People might not know that they're traumatized. They might get into the wrong situation or the wrong context or the wrong setting while they're doing it, and with the wrong people. They might drink too much medicine, and they actually can add trauma into their lives, and that's not something that's widely talked about. So that's something that I can maybe get into a little bit later as well. There's the people that continually go back to the different plants, because even though it is a tool and a very helpful tool, if it calls you, it's also can be used for escapism, and people can continually go back for more without implementing the lessons that they've learned into their everyday life. There's also the dark side of the plant medicine world. There's a lot of black magic, especially in the ayahuasca world. There's a lot of what you would call black magic, right? So it's essentially people doing, if you want to label as dark or negative things, using power for nefarious purposes, trying to attack other shamans, other people in the ceremony, trying to influence, the shamans trying to influence women. There's a lot of, shamans and white women getting into trouble over there. And then there's, some of I like to talk in paradoxes a little bit. So while it can be life-changing, and people can have super transformative experiences, myself included, there's also the people that have been in the ayahuasca circles for quite a while, and they've had a lot of direct experiences, and then they come out the other side, and then they're of the opinion that they don't need ayahuasca or the other plants, because it's only in a sort of certain bandwidth of vibration, or it's only in the lower astral. And they're of the opinion that they no longer need to play in that playground anymore. They would rather do breath work and their own movement practices, and they don't need that particular plant because they feel like it's caught up in a particular vibration, or like I said, like the lower astral. So there's like varying degrees of how people are perceiving what's going on. And I think it's pretty fair to say that even the most advanced shamans or the most experienced will still say that they, a lot of the time they don't actually know what is like the big picture. They still don't have the answers to life. And I think that there's also a trap in people that don't integrate these experiences in feeling like they do have the answers, and that there's kind of there is a trap in there of like, I've heard someone describe it as like in the early stages, it's like some of these plants like deliberately inflate your ego to see if you pass the test. So there's that sort of like that grandiose kind of feeling, because it's kind of like a little bit ungrounded in the sense of, yes, we realize who we really are. Yes, we remember that we're creative beings, or yes, we realize that we are far more powerful than we realize, or whatever it may be. But then there's when that's ungrounded, people can get caught up in that, like, I know what's happening, let me tell you what's happening in the universe. Like I can manifest anything I want instantly in the palm of my hand, like with sort of like mixed truths, and so this is kind of where it gets a bit slippery. And yeah, like a lot of my focus in recent years has been on the integration process. So afterwards, what happens when you go back to your everyday life? What happens when you leave wherever it be, whether it be the cactus, which I've also worked with as well a little bit, Huashuma or San Pedro. And so people kind of like, everything's going really great, they're on top of the world, like they've like made all these changes, and then they go back to their workplace environment, they go back to their family, they go back to the same patterns that are in their everyday life, and they haven't made those changes to really change what sort of got them into those situations. And then when you're face to face with those situations, how do you handle it? Do people sort of go off the cliff and then fall back into the spiral of where they were before, and then need to feel like they have to go back to the medicine? Or are there sort of ways in which they can transmute that energy and integrate it into the daily life? And so this is why I do a lot of more things like what we've already been talking about. Like I will get in natural bodies of water as much as I can. I'll have fire as much as I can. I'll do breathwork practices. I'll do my movement in nature, yoga, all of these kind of things, spending time in the sun, like all of, like, that's not really what I'm here to talk about. Like, they're all kind of, everyone's got their own practice or their own, modality or whatever. But there's kind of like multi-layers to the traps. There's kind of multi-layers to what the actual experience is. And there's kind of entering into right relationship with the plants, going in with the right intention. And sort of like a common theme will be like learning how to surrender. And so I didn't know what surrendering meant. I was like, okay, yeah, surrender. I had no clue. And I was just holding on and, having a bad time. Or, for example, when I first went to start drinking ayahuasca, I thought that what the best path for me to take would be the most direct one. I wanted to find the shaman with the most powerful medicine. I wanted to have a full dose and I wanted to go straight there. I wanted to clear up all of my stuff as soon as possible, get the direct line, give me all the answers, clear it all out, and then I'm sweet. And I totally got my ass kicked. And, you know, for the first 10 times I was having a really bad time. I was drinking way too much medicine. I made a lot of different mistakes, and that's why I feel like I've got some stuff to share is through my direct experience, because I've done a lot of the things that, you know, what I would call like pitfalls that sort of can give you a hard time. And I don't want to see anyone else essentially like re-traumatize themselves, because it can be traumatizing. Like there is such a thing as like ayahuasca trauma, for example. That's kind of like an overlooked thing. Like what happens when, you know, someone goes in there and they drink like a whole heap of medicine and they, you know, just have a terrible time. On one level, that's exactly what they need, and that's the healing that they need. On another level, if they had a few more tools available at their disposal, they may not have chosen that path. So that's a few different things that I just wanted to bring into the conversation. If there's like a particular thread that you guys wanted me to dive deeper into, I'm happy to basically go anywhere. And just before I pass this over to your question, one thing I have remembered is that it's really easy for people to get caught up in negative belief systems about this kind of stuff. And one of the reasons why I'm here to share like a more grounded or integrative message, I hope, is that it's very easy to fall into an entity is doing this, or they are doing that, or some shaman is attacking me, or there's like black magic. There's kind of like all of these different thought forms of all of these sort of different negative cycles. And part of the process is like finding your own power through this and finding your own path. And so there is like a lot of talk in these different medicine circles about sort of what I would, you know, describe as like negative thought forms is the best way that I have to describe it. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that into the conversation as well. Michael, what's up, man?
Cool. Hey, man. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. Like, I've had some interesting experience with mushrooms recently for the last sort of three or so months, and my kind of journey is, you know, is kind of similar of like trying to integrate it. And then what you're saying about these feelings, you go through like grandiose, and you're feeling really inflated because you get these like insights and like downloads, and you just think you're really connected, and in the way you are. And how much of that you can pull back and then integrate into your daily life, and how much is lasting. I think some of the challenges I see is like we just lack so much initiation and ceremony in our lives in general, like as part of manhood and growing up especially, is kind of some of the themes of the shows we've done. And so that carries over when you're crossing over into these other dimensions, right? There's like whole other worlds out there, and we have no real initiation into them or understanding of them. Like it's not covered in school, obviously. Probably no one you know has done it. Our parents don't know what they're doing around it. So when you go into the forest or you take some plant for the first time, a lot of the time we don't know the right intention or the right ceremony or ritual to go into. And so I think that's the whole point of like why shamans are supposed to be a better way to access it, because you're going through someone that has some, you know, connection and knowledge to that world. And so like, for example, I'd be much more comfortable taking ayahuasca with someone like yourself who's done 50, 60 ceremonies and who's also a friend. And I feel like that's a good space to explore it from. Whereas going in myself to some jungle, finding some shaman who's maybe got some good reviews or whatever, I still wouldn't feel as comfortable. It just wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't be something I'm drawn to do. But I think also in isolation is quite powerful. Like if you have a really good grounding or center. And so like I do a practice every day, I tell people about, it's like involving sun gazing and grounding and yoga. And that's just like a really nice frame to kind of put the body into. And especially if you're taking magic or something on top of that, it just stacks really well. So by the time this energy is coming into you, you're in such a good and strong space. Like a lot of those negative thought forms and cycles I experience sometimes with taking like magic in a dark environment, like indoors or at night, they just don't happen at all. I feel like I'm in such a good space and I can explore the energy with so much like power and strength that it never even crosses over into like a bad trip or what you might term it as. And the energy can be quite powerful, quite overwhelming. Like you said, you know, people find it hard to surrender sometimes to that. And in that fight, in that resistance, that's obviously a lot where people have issues, right? Because they're not used to that sort of energy coming into their field, and so they don't know how to work with it, or it's like a foreign, you know, feeling. And so that uncertainty can cause, I guess, anxiety or whatever. And that's just like a mental loop you can work yourself into all kinds of issues with
Yeah.
that. But the surrender part of it, I think if you feel like you're in a really good space and you obviously have done maybe like lower doses, like working up. So what you were saying about jumping in straight to the max dose, like that's just a surefire way to get your ass kicked with anything. Like I think we've all done that where they were drinking a whole bottle of vodka or something and then feeling sick for a week or whatever. I mean, it's the same thing. Like these are all medicines. And so like I started with very, very low dose. And over like every 2 weeks or so, I take a slightly higher dose and higher dose until I was getting up to pretty high doses of magic mushrooms. And at that point, it was still very overwhelming because it's like really strong when it comes on, and you get this feeling like you're going to be sick, almost like the nausea of the I guess it's similar with ayahuasca, but I kind of learned to breathe through it and kind of let it go. And so it's like you can sort of transcend that moment, and then it's it's good from then on. Like the physical feelings pass, and then you're just enjoying that experience. So I'm guessing my question is like to you is like, for people who are thinking about doing this, is like, when do you know it's the right time to do it? And like, for example, I've had a lot of people bringing ayahuasca to me recently, just saying, "Oh, there's a ceremony here, ceremony there." It's like it's obviously coming to my awareness a lot. It's being brought to my awareness for some reason. I still don't feel particularly like called to go do it. And sometimes things just drop in my lap. Like I'll be in a country and this thing just drops in my lap, and then I'll do it, because the universe has brought it to me. So I'm not making a lot of effort right now to go and seek out these things, but they seem to be like, people keep telling me about them. Like, "Oh, this is happening, this is happening." So I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to do it. And I wouldn't say I'm scared of it or apprehension. I have like any apprehension around it, but I just don't feel like I need it right now. And I guess I've got a lot of other good practices going on that's kind of working for me. So like, how did you know that you kind of needed it? And I guess, was it the first plant that you'd worked with, or had you done other things before? And like, what was the context of that? And I think that probably plays a lot into the integration part of it, because depending on your state of mind going into these things, it's probably a lot harder or easier to integrate it afterwards. So just, whatever you...
Yeah. I'll get to that. And there's a bunch of stuff I want to cover, and then I will answer your question, because I really do agree that, there's a lack of initiation and specifically for young men and rites of passage. And this is something I was having a conversation with today. I live on what has been for a very long time a male initiation site for the Aboriginals here. Like that's the actual location of where I'm doing this from. And obviously I'm not Aboriginal, but like this is where I live. And so part of what I'm going to be doing is setting up a men's circle, because this sort of stuff is like very hard to come by these days. And part of the reason why I started doing the vision quests is because of that lack of initiation in life, and to be part of like a spiritual community, if you will. And like in the old days, like young men would go through a rites of passage, and part of the this 4-day process where you don't have any food or water, and you have a sweat lodge at the beginning and the end, and you're sitting on the mountain by yourself. That's like a really good reset every year, and that's something that I find really beneficial. And in some weird way, I actually kind of enjoy being up there for 4 days. Like it's not like, it is very difficult, but it's also something that I kind of look forward to, and everyone kind of, it's kind of like has a bunch of trepidation or whatever. So I wanted to acknowledge that, because I do think it's really needed these days, and I think that there's been a lot of separation from these indigenous cultures and these indigenous ways, and especially for Western people, like it's very hard to come across like sort of real people as well. But to answer your question, I mean, I because I've had my ass kicked like so brutally, like I'm very clear that people really shouldn't be doing the medicine unless they're absolutely called to, and they're clear that they want to do it. So in your case, Michael, like anyone that would be talking like you are, I would suggest that just not to do it until that you know that it's for you, and that it's calling you. Because like I was saying, like, I mean, for a while there and probably even now, ayahuasca specifically became the flavor of the month. And so like everyone, and even Iquitos, like I don't go to Iquitos anymore, and I don't want to. It's really not like a place that I enjoy. It's basically ayahuasca tourism, and for me the energy there is just pretty horrendous. And the majority of the places there are practicing stuff that I wouldn't adhere to or agree with, or so I just wouldn't really recommend anyone at all, to be honest. And most people that I know that have been in it for a number of years would say that they maybe know one or two shamans like in the world that they could safely say, like, hey, this is a good person to go to. And I guess you go through, phases, because I've been through different phases in my life in these last years, in the last 5 years, of thinking that I knew who the best shaman was and who the most powerful shaman was and who the clearest shaman was and who had the best lineage and all of that. And it's kind of what we're talking about, like the Kung Fu lineage in the call last week as well, right? There is kind of that element to it. And one of the plants that I've dieted for a month is, I'm actually wearing the bracelet now. It's called Noah Rao. It's the tree of light. They say there's only about 5 of these trees left in the world. And there is the need for that proper lineage, like to go through like the proper protocols with the proper people and all of that. If you don't go through the proper lineages or through those protocols, maybe you won't find the medicine as clear of transmission, because there is like an actual process that you go through in having a relationship with those plants. That being said, the plants are tools, and you don't necessarily need a shaman. We're all shamans. Even though I said I'm not a shaman before, I believe that we're all shamans, and that we're all sort of in those realms, whether we know it or not. And so if we know how to enter the relationship with these plants, we can do it ourselves. Would I recommend like someone that kind of has experience with other plants to sort of set up their own ceremony and to do it themselves? I wouldn't, no. But that I would never tell anyone not to do anything or to do anything, because they know the best for themselves. I tend to think that what happens if we're talking about ayahuasca, for example, people don't really know how to have a clear circle. They don't know how to protect themselves, if you will. Not that it's about protection, but it's about having like a clear vessel of communication and a clear space. And it opens up you into spaces that a lot of people may not know where they're going or what energies are in there, so to speak. And so that's where the shaman can really help, is by keeping the space clear. And so, especially if people are kind of doing it like for the first times, generally not something I would recommend, but I definitely know of people that just would prefer to drink the medicine themselves. They have no fear around being harmed, because they know that on a higher level they don't give permission to anything to harm them and all that kind of thing, and they're comfortable to navigate that space. But I personally find a lot of value in spending time with like a proper shaman, but I definitely do know people that would prefer to go in a different like by themselves. And to answer your question about how I got into it, basically I was going through. I found out that the girl that I was living with for a few years and that I'd planned like to have a life with was cheating on me the whole time. And I was also going through a phase in my business, which resulted in me selling my company afterwards. So it was kind of like basically like a life direction change. It was like the conglomeration of all of these things coming together. And it was kind of like a big realization and like a big shift in the direction. It was kind of like, I moved out of home when I was young. I moved out of home when I was 15, and there was kind of like I was doing different things like meditation and Vipassana and personal development and bettering myself and optimizing and doing nootropics and kind of doing the hustling and business and making money. And it was kind of like I was living abroad and I was making a lot of money and I was doing meditation and I was doing all of this stuff, and it wasn't making me feel any better. And it was kind of like this sense of there was a whole lot more than what I was, than what I knew. It was kind of like I didn't know what I didn't know. And when I was doing a 21-day Vipassana with this lady who taught Vipassana to the Thai royal family, it actually came up in there. And then I'd heard about it before through an entrepreneurial community, and I'd always tell myself that when I go to South America, if it came up, I would go. And I was over in the Brazil World Cup in 2014, And while I was over there, I organised to pop over to Peru after it. And it was the day as I had planned to go and live in Shanghai and to have training with the Grandmaster Tai Chi Qigong kind of teacher, and that was my plan. And so the day before I went into the jungle for the first time, I actually talked to the guy and confirmed that I was going to move to China and I was going to go down that path of the internal martial arts and all of that. And then that absolutely did not happen once I got in and out of the jungle. So there was sort of like really big life changes. But to answer your question, it was because I was called to, I knew that there was something there for me. And it was kind of like one of those like life events where it was kind of like, you know, I knew that I needed to do something about it. And funny story, as a bit of an aside, the first time that I drank ayahuasca, I had a CNN crew in my face because they were doing a documentary, like an episode of their thing, and it's on YouTube if you want to look at it. It was with Lisa Ling, This Is Life, and it was about, there's a guy in my group, and he used to be in the military, and they were doing a segment on healing PTSD with ayahuasca for military veterans, and he was in my group. And so they were, the first time I drank ayahuasca, I had a camera light in my face, and it was like snapped me out of my experience. So and then I would say the first sort of 10 times that I drank ayahuasca, I had an extremely difficult time, and I learned a lot in that process, and I learned how to navigate that space. And I also just wanted to mention again that I really had no idea of what surrendering actually meant. And it wasn't until I had a lot more experience that I could actually learn to navigate that space, because it was completely foreign to me. And so when people were saying to me, just surrender, I would be lying there being like, okay, just surrender, and completely not doing it, having like just a complete disconnection from my physical body and just not knowing, like they were just words to me in a sense. So it took me like more immersion and a longer period of time to sort of to go through those journeys and to sort of learn how to navigate it. And then learning like the imagination and the dream part of it really being a big part of it. Something that you really notice as it starts to open up your dreams, and you start to become more aware of how important your dream state is. You start to be aware of just how important creativity is in your life and in ceremony as well. Like you can use your imagination, your creativity in ceremony to navigate the experience itself. You don't have to be a victim. You know, you can create your way out of it. You don't have to be subject to what's going on in there. And there's all kinds of different, like methodologies that people have. Like, for example, one shaman told the group that, all of the stuff going on with you right now, pack it into like a big balloon and just shove it all in there. And then when you're done with all of that stuff that you're trying to let go of or that's bothering you, just send it away and put it into the light. And I've had people say that like, oh, that's kind of bullshit, so don't worry about doing that kind of thing. So everyone's got their own ways of navigating it as well. So yeah.
That's super interesting, actually. And I want to get into a bit like what it shows you and where exactly you're going in this, experience. Like, where's your consciousness going, and what are those dimensions, and how it maybe links to the dream state. But my question is also, the thing about surrender, and like what you're saying about you can actually participate in this. You're not just a passive observer. So that's also kind of a paradox, because, if you think about surrender, it's implying you're somehow passive in this process, but it's not really the case. It's more just surrendering, trying to be in control all the time. Like, I think because our ego is so dominant, every time we wake up, we're in this just reinforced mode, right? We're always in that waking state mode. And so to surrender that perception for a period of time, to suspend that and enjoy another experience or perception, just like when you go to sleep, right? You're surrendering to sleep. You can't really fight it. You just have to surrender to it. But then you can also lucid dream, and you can actively participate in your dreams once you become conscious of where you are and how to kind of navigate. So I think that's the part that I'm curious about getting into with mushrooms, especially as I do bigger doses. Is like now I'm very comfortable with the process, and there's no uncertainty or fear in that. So now I feel like I can actually explore a bit deeper and like have conversations maybe with whatever is there, like some intelligence, or like actively participate in like how my senses are altered to interact with my environment. So, for example, when I'm on mushrooms, I do sun gazing sometimes, and I find that the energy is actually opened up to me a lot. I can receive a lot more radiation. I can look into the sun much more strongly, and I can actually feel like I'm having almost a conversation or something. It's like a very strong connection that mushroom seems to open up for me with the sun. And so this thing about like passively observing versus active participation, maybe also your experience in that journey through these 56 experiences, like at what point did it flip for you, and how did you start to figure out exactly where it is you're going and what the plant is showing, all this kind of stuff, and does that differ from plant to plant? Because I guess you got more experience with ayahuasca and other things, but I'm curious because I've only done with one specific plant, how your experience has been across different medicines.
Yeah, so
there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, so for me, I would say that as I became more empowered through the process, as I healed more and more trauma and became more aware of how to navigate the space, I then sort of had more tools available to me to be able to create or imagine in those realms, instead of essentially not knowing what's going on, feel like it's all happening to me, I'm a victim, or even if it's not bad, it could be good. Like, it's just kind of like the experience is happening to you and you're just kind of sitting there and watching. It's sort of, I would say that for me, it came with experience, and there's really no, for me at least, there's kind of like no way around it. There wasn't something like that I did. It was more of like an internal state of like, this is happening to me, to I'm a part of it, and or this is me. And so it's kind of like as you just become aware of what the experience is in some way, and it's like again, you're not going to get like the downloads of the universe like in the first hour of your first ceremony, but like chipping away as you kind of clear out trauma. If that's like, this is just like language that I'm using, you can like frame it any way you want, but I would say like as your vessel becomes clearer and you clear that trauma, you're then able to receive clear communications. And then as you're able to receive clear communications and you learn more about who you are, you learn that like on a higher level, that you're not a victim, or like that nothing's happening to you, and it's like you're the kind of master of your own destiny, if you will. So it's kind of more like an internal realization that, you know, that you give permission, or that you give authority, or that you are the creator of this experience in some way. And then there's also the surrendering to, it's a paradox, right? Because you're creating and you're surrendering at the same time. And it's kind of like you're passive and you're active at the same time as well. So it's like, and this is kind of where the not knowing comes into it, and something that I wanted to touch on while I was in this as well, because I really feel like there's a specific energy in this seeking energy, which is really a slippery slope. So we seek things there rather than just going in and allowing what coming through to manifest what's ready to manifest. There's like I'm mapping, seeking out the answers. I need more data. I need more information. I need to talk to this person. Like, there's this kind of perpetual energy of this sort of spiritual seeker, which is a really slippery slope as well. And I think that's kind of in all different areas of life.
Would you say that's like seeking versus allowing, like very broadly, or is it more than that?
Yeah, like so the difference between like creating and manifesting and seeking, because like all of the, you know, like famous, you know, like you know, like gurus or philosophers or whatever, they all say that, like, you know, eventually you realize that home is what is within. Eventually you realize that there's nowhere to go other than inside. Eventually you realize that you are the creator being, and that you don't need someone else to tell you how to live your life. Eventually you realize that you are enough as you are. Eventually you realize the true magnificence of you and your complete being. And then as you kind of come to that realization, you're able to trust in the universe. And this is like a big part of the process, is trusting in yourself and trusting in your higher self, your inner self, and trusting in the universe that what's showing up for you is enough, and that you're being guided by your own journey and by your own sort of higher self, if you will. Again, just another term, not a hierarchy. There's no higher being controlling like a God thing or anything like that, but just kind of like who you are at a deeper level is like you're being divinely guided. You're listening to the messages. You're acting through synchronicity. You're allowing the flow to come through, so you can continue on that path, versus like forcing a particular outcome and having expectations on what that outcome is going to be. Then you asked me specifically, like, what do you think is happening? And I don't think anyone's really going to have a great answer to that. The best answer that I've got right now is that we learn who we are, or we remember more of who we are. And so one of the key takeaways for me was that it's kind of like the existence beyond time and space, the existence beyond this physical form and this human level, this understanding that we are ancient beings, that we are, in spirit form and metaphysical form, and that we have, countless infinite lives in infinite universes in all different kinds of realities and dimensions, and it's all happening simultaneously. And that and that's kind of like there's the big grand arena of who we truly are, and sort of there's that kind of, once you kind of, it's like you kind of grasp it for a second, and then as you finally feel like, oh, I've got it, it kind of just goes into the multiverse, and then you're like, did anything just happen? Because it's kind of like you don't need to like hold on to that like particular like answer to life, so to speak. It's just kind of like these knowings just continue to grow, and then you learn to discern better. So when synchronicities come up, you learn, is that really a synchronicity? Or is that like something coming through trauma and me kind of recreating a pattern in my life? And so you kind of learn more of who you are. You have more of a direct experience. You have a clearer vessel, so to speak. So you can sort of tune in more easily and trust your intuition more, and you can make decisions based on that intuition. And then that leads to more things that happen. And that's kind of like part of the process. That I've gone through.
Yeah, I really like that, framing it that way. It's almost like you're reframing your identity, because like who we think we are is just so limited based on how we're conditioned, right, from when we're born. And obviously society is looking at reality very one-dimensionally, or just in space and time and things we can measure and see. I was actually reading this book called The Secret Teaching of the Ages by Manny P. Hall. He's an interesting guy, like a philosopher, a Freemason, and he was basically talking about the Gnostics, and the Gnostics were kind of like a branch of Christianity, like long time ago. And their basic philosophy was there was three different types, if you like, of like humans or ways of thinking. And the first was like the savages, who basically the only thing they believed is the thing they could see. And if you think about how that's evolved basically into science, that is exactly what science is. Like science is just, we only believe what we can measure, what we can see, what we can, that's real. Everything else doesn't exist. And so the Gnostics actually call that the savages, like the most primitive form of like life. And that's in some ways how we are evolved today, is in that sort of lens of filter of measuring things. And therefore it's like, it's a very boring world, or a very limited world, because you only know small parts of yourself, and you're not initiated to know any other deeper parts of yourself, or just all the other dimensions your being is on, right? Like dream time, for example. You go to sleep for 8 hours a day, a third of your life is in a different dimension, and you have no understanding of that part of yourself. Like we just don't know how to access it, or trained in what that is and where we're going. Like, oh, it's just for recovery. It's just like a very physical meaning given to it in a very limited context. So if you take that perspective of way of looking at it, and how we're kind of growing up with a very small part of our identity, and like you said, remembering who we are, I feel that's been the biggest sort of aha moment for me, not just with magic, but also with sun gazing and connecting to other nature and those other modalities kind of we've touched on, is that they're all showing you a piece of who you are, and you can stack those things together and kind of really change how you're sensing and perceiving your environment. And therefore you're shown different things. And like you said, you get intuition, you get insights about, what is actually going on, what is the nature of reality. And there's another guy I like called Peter Sage, and he's a bit more, I guess, practical, but he talks about, the phases that we go through, like when we're growing up, and maybe it's like a stage or sign of maturity. Like first you think first you think things are happening to you, and that's a very like blame, victimhood, passive type of perceiving reality. Then this is by you, so you think you're doing everything, and this is the entrepreneur kind of hustle thing. I'm achieving, I'm goal setting, I'm making it, I'm this like the typical like capitalist and model of like pushing your force into the world, and you take all the credit for it. And I think that's very similar when you take some of these magic mushrooms or psychedelics, is that you take credit for what you're experiencing because you think, yeah, I got somewhere, I got the download, I got the enlightenment, let me tell you all about it. It's like you're taking credit for it. And then he says the part after that is it's through me. So it's from to me to by me to through me, and you realize it's all just happening through you. You are connected to everything because you are part of everything, and all the illusions of this separateness that then you create this identity out of. That's what I think I'm trying to say, is that we create an identity based out of separation. So we say, I am doing this, it's me, and then you take the credit for it because you assume you're some great god or something, right? And there is obviously an aspect of this illusion of separation that, I have this body and therefore it's very convincing. I look around, I got this meat bag, and I tell myself that's who I am, and I have a passport with my name on it, and so that's that's my identity. And that separation really starts to break down, and you also don't take credit for anything because you realize this is all just happening through me. I'm just remembering a piece. It's like we're witnessing different pieces of ourselves through our own lens. And so that's been the biggest shift for me, like with sun gazing, but also like fasting, like you mentioned, is a very powerful way of breaking down some of these barriers, some of these illusions of who we think we are in identity. So yeah, I'm curious, like, does it reach a stage where you stop using that plant because you kind of you've just got that permanent feeling of like, I am not who I thought I was, I am something completely different. And maybe there's other plants that then you can go and work on and just to get downloads and insights from, because like I'm pretty sure and convinced I'm not this body, like this identity I'm given is just a name. It's just whatever. I'm kind of let go of that. I don't really have any names for myself. Like I'm not British anymore. What people call me, is just like, that's just one bit of it. And I'm looking now, my interest is all the other areas. And so there's a little bit of seeking in that for sure, like trying to understand who we are. And there's also plenty of allowing in that sense of like, I know what it takes to put me into a good space. So I just feel amazing for the rest of the day. So I have like a really nice ritual that I do every day. And I guess with the plants, I'm wondering like, what is it you're still getting after 50 or 60 trips, or can you just let that go now? You're not going to learn any more from that particular plant. And where does it evolve from there?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And, I wanted to touch on a couple of things like those three things that guy said, describes things very succinctly. So that's like that. Like I really like that. And then again, like I'll continue talking in paradoxes because I believe it's like you hold one thought, you hold another, and then it's like beyond that. So like for example, like with the gods thing, right? There's the there's understanding like the true nature of who we really are, and we're far more powerful than what we sort of are led to believe. And we're part of this magnificent multiverse and all of that. And then there's the gods, and then there's the religious gods, and then there's but then it kind of gets a bit skewed where it's like people start to say that the gods created all of this, or things like the ancient history of Egypt. So people start to believe that like the gods did that, but there's also like advanced previous human civilizations which were in harmony with nature, but then it kind of gets skewed with the whole God thing. Or pagans, for example, like they will be doing like nature rituals, or they will like be communing with a particular plant, and then that will get convoluted with they are calling in gods, and they are participating in magic rituals, and they're connecting with all these energies. So there's all these kind of like points of slipperiness in there, and I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that before I answer your question. And the answer that I will give is that there is no answer to your question. It's like we decide that like we have a relationship with these plants, and that it's up to us to either hear a calling, or to deepen our relationship with that plant, or to have a break, or to continue with it. I think that a lot of these plants have a lot of wisdom, and it's up to us to decide if we want to deepen that relationship, or we've got enough for that period of time, or you finish that relationship with that plant. Like for example, I did a bunch of Ayahuasca ceremonies. I spent months in the jungle, and then I thought I was done. I was one of those people that went through that phase of like, I don't need this anymore and all of that. And then I was called back specifically because I wanted to work with Noah Rao, and that was a plant that I'd been sort of had on my radar for a number of years, and then it showed up, and I was recommended through a mutual friend, like the people with the lineage and all that kind of thing. Like things like a burger. I've done a mega dose of that, and also worked with people that had done the initiation in Gabon in Africa, and that's really, really full on. So I'm like, everyone has their own ways of working with it, whether it be, and I won't say that I'm experienced enough to know the ways, because I haven't gone over to Gabon yet and done the initiation. I've been invited to do it, but I haven't done it yet. But I know some people that will sort of microdose a burger, and I know other people that might say that the way to deepen your relationship with that plant is through ritual, through the initiation, or through with the proper people. So I think, and then it comes into like a lot of these indigenous cultures as well, that it can get quite problematic at times with white people or with indigenous cultures and cultural appropriation, and what's okay to do on one land and what's not, and what's okay to drink with one tribe and not. And so at the end of the day, I really think that like the way that I frame it is what my relationship is with that plant, or with that mushroom, or with that kingdom, whether it be the mineral kingdom with the crystals, or whether it be like with the mushrooms, or am I going to microdose the mushroom, or am I going to work with it daily? Am I going to like go into nature and commune with it on a daily basis, or am I going to set up a ritual around it and do a ceremony, or am I going to have 5 grams and do a hero dose, or am I go and do an initiation with the Butchi people in Gabon with the Iboga? I really think that there's like proper ways to do it. There's indigenous ways. There's like, at the end of the day, for me, it comes down to relationship, or maybe like the Buddhist people would call it like right relationship. So understanding that you're entering into the plant kingdom world, or the plant kingdom realms, and that you would like to enter into a relationship with respect and honor and integrity, and with a clear intention of why you're entering into that relationship. And it's through that developing the understanding and the experience and the knowledge, wisdom, and tools on how to work with those plants, that you kind of get more of an understanding of how to deepen that relationship, or how to have a relationship, like, and sort of frame it sort of more in the terms of how can I continue this relationship with this plant, versus I'm going to go and get my candy hit and get some download from the universe because I feel up to it tonight. There's kind of like a different framing and a different set of intentions, and that's something that I really want to kind of stress. And I know that you guys are all probably aware of this, but there is that kind of candy culture of the plant medicine world as well. It's like, I'll try a bit of this, I'll try a bit of that, I'll go and do some 5-MeO DMT toad, I will go and smoke some DMT, all right, give me the mushrooms today, okay, like, or I'll kind of mix them all together. And there's kind of a whole lot of that. And again, I've had my ass kicked enough and I've done the wrong things like everyone else as well. I really revere my relationship to these plants. I find them as allies and friends, and it's important to me. It's like that I continue in like those relationships in a way which is harmonious with my being, and it kind of can take away those really big ups and downs as well. And then just kind of like one thing I wanted to touch on, and I know you didn't sort of ask about it, but it's about sort of because I wanted to mention like smoking DMT or LSD or MDMA. I know there's that MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Science, MAPS.org. They're the world leaders as far as I'm aware of, like the science behind a lot of the psychedelics. And so they're doing LSD assisted psychotherapy and MDMA assisted psychotherapy. I do think that there are benefits to MDMA, but in general, what I'll say, but in my personal experience, I'm not saying that I'm right, but in terms of LSD, MDMA, and smoking DMT, I personally prefer to work with the spirit of the plants in a like sort of like the whole plant, if you will, or the kind of the brew, or the kind of like the more indigenous way, although like the way that kind of has been traditionally worked with, even if it doesn't always have to be traditional. I guess what I'm saying is when it's like extracted and smoked, and you smoke that DMT, I know people get a lot of benefits from it, and there will be a lot of people disagree with me. But for me, one of the reasons why I'm not called to like smoke DMT, for example, or continue working with LSD is because I'm not really after the chemical. I'm after the plant. Like I want to deepen that relationship with that plant spirit. And yeah, I don't know, people have got a bunch of experience and good has come from smoking DMT. One little funny story, I did meet someone in the jungle who had smoked DMT about 2,200 times and had a whole lot of shit going on. So that was a little bit of anecdotal kind of joke there. But yeah, you know, things like, you know, it is becoming quite popular these days. I think it's important that people really understand what they're getting into and how to kind of set like clear intentions and understanding what their intentions are and sort of not setting themselves up to kind of, you know, like heighten the stuff that they've gone there to heal, or to cause them more grief. And you know, so now 5-MeO DMT, like the toad, that's in Mexico, that's getting pretty popular. The mushrooms are getting popular. It's important to understand that there's different kinds of mushrooms as well, like whether it be the gold tops or the Amanita muscaria. You know, they're all different. They're all different energies. Like they're all mushrooms, of course, but they're all different beings. And so it's important to understand the relationship with that being that you're entering into a relationship with. Not to get too, like, I don't know where people are at with their kind of language. You know, it's kind of like a plant or a being or an entity or whatever. It's kind of depending on kind of the spectrum of your language. It doesn't really mean much to me, and I just kind of, it's pretty normal for me to be using that kind of language.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, I think what you're saying and what my feeling is as well is that when you just take in the synthetic, you're missing the context, right? Because the context is all the information around that experience that you don't really get necessarily with DMT or LSD. And so you're pretty much taking something that doesn't have that sort of rich history or tradition of context. And I think a lot of maybe what's happened over the years is like people taking a certain plant or a certain, you know, say mushroom, and whoever's taken that has entered into a certain dimension or reality, and then that's kind of been added to over time, right? So there's like a richness of tradition and context that's all there. All the information is stored in some field somewhere. That's what I personally believe. And that when you take something that's synthetic like LSD or MDMA, it's like you've got the molecule, you've got the chemical, but you don't have the context. And so your ability to sort of perceive that and integrate, I think, is kind of limited unless you already have a very strong perception from other plants and other experiences of what's going on to kind of help you put that in context. So like I've got a bag of DMT. I've been sitting on it for about a month and I haven't touched it. I just don't feel like drawn to it for some reason. It's really weird. It was just offered to me for free. So, you know, I've got it, but all my mushrooms are gone already. So like, you know, it's just a different teacher. Like you said, I think maybe it can send you into different state of perception, and that can be useful to see there's different parts of yourselves and wake you up to parts you didn't know existed, you know. But then what's the downside or what's the limit of that? I think is, like I said, is the context maybe is missing around all that tradition that's built on top of these other plants, and you're accessing that as well. And then, you know, mushrooms specifically, why I like them or why I think they are great teachers is, like I was saying, we did a show on mushroom intelligence, and if you look back at the lineage of our evolution, we actually go back to the same origin. Like fungus, we were fungus like 1.6 billion years ago, right? So at some point, mushrooms are our ancestors, and that point, in some way, you're connecting to your ancestors, and then that can be like another way of remembering who you are from that perspective. So I just think that's way more powerful than something that's just like a molecule that, you know, it doesn't have context or any real tradition or history behind it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you know, some people say mycelium is the fascia of the earth, and I really like that saying. I will note that you can get natural sources of DMT. Like you can, like for example, you can make it out of like a chacruna leaf, which is mixed with the ayahuasca vine or with chaliponga. There are natural forms of it. I just personally prefer not to extract the DMT molecule and to smoke it. Like again, don't have direct experience with it, so it's easy for me to judge. But that's just like where I am with my journey at the moment. And then it's also worth noting as well that these plant spirits, they also have shadow sides. They also can be tricksters. They can also, like, they're not all like love and light as well. I think that's worth saying, like, as well. It's like, understanding that you're not just going to take a plant or a root or a mushroom and then the plant's going to be like, oh, hi, human, let me just give you a big warm cuddle and a hug and show you the answers to the universe, and like, let me heal your heart and let me just take away that trauma for you. Like, it's not like they're in a particular like dimension or band of frequency or a level of existence, and they operate differently than humans because they're not human, right? And so there's all these other sides to it, and there's all these other realms and all of that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of worth noting as well that it's like, doesn't necessarily all have to be in love and light, or like, there's this kind of like, there's these different parts to it. And it's like, some plants may have more dark side to them than another. Like a perfect example of that is the datura or the brugmansia. And so in a lot of traditions in South America or in Mexico or in Australia, it's used for black brujeria or black magic, or like whatever you want to call it. But it's also very, very powerful. It can be like, considered like a hugely powerful plant. And then, there are some people that say that it's so powerful that it affects their other plant diets in the jungle in a really negative way. Even if they just come into contact with it, it can come into their dreams and it can just mess everything up. And there's, there's been, some trouble in years gone by because shamans used to, or they still do, add it into the ayahuasca brews to give people more vivid visions. But then there's a whole other side to it, because these people don't really understand the true nature of the like the plant or the relationship with it. I've got a friend that worked with it for a year. And what he said to me was that it's 80% dark and it's 20% light. And so, that's just a representation of it. But what he said was that it showed him all of his darkness. It went through like all of the dark parts of his being. It showed him all of the fear, all of the scariest shit about himself and the world, like just all of the darkest stuff. And because he was able to get through that period of time, he was then able to get able to establish like a proper relationship with it, and kind of came out the other side of it in a really fantastic way. And not kind of, he didn't slip into that kind of psychotic world in which people that have used it in the wrong ways actually do go psychotic, because it's like, when taken in the wrong way, people can go on trips for several days and can get really, really messed up. So again, it really comes back to like what the intention is and how you're entering into those relationships with those plants as well. Like, for example, Noah Rao, which I've dieted for a month, it's the tree of light. People think that they're going to get like big galactic divine light and all of that, which you can do, but the way that it does it is that it shines like the brightest light that you've ever seen in the universe that you know of on your darkest shadow. And it illuminates it. It illuminates the shadow aspect of yourself and really puts it right in your face. And it's like, hey, have you seen this? And once you sort of work through that and you transmute and you really go like, into the darkest parts of it, or then it kind of opens up into the planetary, the galactic, and all of that kind of stuff. But it's not just like, hey, because the leaves are luminescent and they kind of glow in the dark, it's just like this divine galactic thing. It's not just that. It's kind of like these plants work, they have a shadow side, they work in different ways, they all have their own personalities, and every culture has their own unique way of working with them as well. So that's worth sharing as well. And yeah, I just tend to steer clear of saying things are this or they are that, because I know I know, for example, just in like more of our world, like in the technology world or the entrepreneurial world, people can get into it like from the brain hacking perspective, like they want to microdose like for a chemical, or they want to take LSD while they're in Silicon Valley, or they want to take some mushrooms to get the downloads and all that. Like, yes, can be very helpful for stuff like that, but it's really, for me, like establishing like a clear intention and relationship. I'll just keep repeating those words over and over, because even though you may not know what they mean, it's kind of what I've learned over a period of time was that it was important to me to do that.
I think my intention when taking these things is always like, show me what is going on, show me the nature of reality, show me who I am. So, but not from a place of fear. And I guess like when you're saying plants have different shadow sides, I think that's also, it can be good or bad depending on how strong your psyche is to handle what's being shown to you, right? If you're just totally imbalanced, like physically, for example, let's say your hormones and transmitters all over the place. Like I talk about this a lot. That I think one reason I'm able to do high doses and take it quite well is because I've got my basic health in balance. Like I've checked my melatonin, my dopamine, my serotonin. Like all those things are working and optimal. And so much of that is denatured today for people. So when you take a really strong plant medicine to just shove it in someone who's denatured, like you're going to really shock the system. And I think that's probably what a lot of people don't understand when they talk about context. Is like they're just looking for some tool, like a hack, to give them some unfair advantage in life. Like biohacking is a lot about that, like some smart drug that's going to make you smarter than everyone else so you can be more successful, make more money. But you're totally missing like the context of where your body's at, where your mind's at, what you can handle, and what's going to be shown to you, and can you handle it. So I haven't personally experienced or played around with a bunch of these plants like you have, to have that understanding or that context, that perspective. But I've taken like these plants like mushrooms when I was younger in a recreational setting, and like I didn't have any idea, my intention wasn't there, I had no understanding of what I was doing, I was just messing around and mixing with other drugs, and I had bad trips, because my psyche wasn't there, I wasn't in the right space, it was at night, like mixing with other drugs. So just lots of different experiences with the same plant, even in different environments, different settings. And I think when your intention is strong, your psyche is there, your serotonin, your all that stuff is good. And I think you got a much better chance of handling whatever is shown to you without it sending you into some tailspin, ending up in a psychotic state or something. So I think, yeah, if you're the kind of person that relies on a lot of shocks and hits to your nervous system, like you use a lot of coffee or alcohol or sugar and you're constantly wiring your system that way, and you don't have a strong center or grounding, like maybe these substances could also just be too much, to handle. And you need to start slow or really, think about what your intention is, to be more conscious of that, and not just like popping it like a pill, like a biohack, biohacker would do. But I want to open it up to other people as well, because I've kind of been dominating all the questions. I don't know if Lynn or Emil or Pierre have anything to ask or anything to share from their perspective.
I would like to ask some questions regarding the dieting part, because I was actually supposed to do a La Dieta in Peru when I was there in 2015, but we ended up leaving prematurely, so I never got to it. But I tried to look online and figure out how does it really work. You say you've been dieting this plant for 1 month, and if somebody would want to do something similar with a plant in their neighborhood that they feel very connected to, how would you get about that? How would you start connecting with the plant, start figuring out to start eating it and connecting it in a deep way? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, so just to be clear, like the dieting process is something, what I'm aware of is specific to the South American, like Amazon region. I'm not sure how the different cultures around the world, it's something I'm actively looking at right now, how they commune with the plants. But like when people say the dieting process that you're alluding to, what a lot of people don't realize is that when people go to the Amazon and they drink ayahuasca, part of that process can be also working with another separate plant. And so the ayahuasca is actually just one part of it, and another as significant part of it is working this other plant as well. And so generally the first ceremony that you do will open the relationship with this plant that is generally selected for you, or that you can also choose, like if you're at an ayahuasca center or something, and the song of that plant will be sung into the ceremony, it'll be sung to you, and that'll open up your relationship with that plant. And then you'll ingest that plant, whether it be like a shot glass a day, or they all have their own different protocols, whether it be like, maybe the first day and the last day, it could be like a shot glass full every day. It could be like half a glass full, like every second day, depending on what kind of plant it is. But generally, the process is, and from a historical perspective, this, from what I know, is actually more of like a Western implementation as well. It wasn't necessarily like the actual diet in terms of sorry, I'll rephrase that. In terms of like the diet and what foods you can and can't have, and the no salt and no sex and all of the kind of rules around it, that's more of like a Western retreat version of it. It's not necessarily like the indigenous people had all of these rules all about it. But generally the process is that you want to keep with the food and water that you have, you want to eat very neutral foods. You want to have like a plant-based diet, or with fish, with plantains and that kind of thing. And you basically want to be eating stuff that's not going to basically have like all these other energies like interacting with the plant that you're dieting. And so the idea is that you're basically going on like a cleanse of some sort, and then it's opening up your ability to perceive. So then when you're working with this other plant that you're ingesting every day, or whatever it is, that you're able to open up a clear communication with it. And so that's basically the process that you'll go through, whether it be 7 days, 10 days, a month, or several months. I know that like in a lot of the South American traditions, they will diet one particular master plant or tree for a minimum of a year, and then that'll become their master teacher, and that's sort of like their pathway to becoming a shaman. But to answer your question, you know, in the South American tradition, they'll have an ayahuasca ceremony to open it up, and then they'll work with that plant by having a particular food diet, and by not being on devices and being like in isolation in a hut. And they will ingest that plant every day, and they'll write a diary. They won't have any inputs at all, depending on how strict you want to be. So you basically just have your bed, a hammock, you know, write in the diary, and that's all the simulation that you have. And you have a very bland diet, so you can connect more deeply with that plant, and then you will sit with it for a specific period of time. That's generally how it works. How people do it in other countries, everyone's got their own version of it. That's how it's done in the South American tradition. But you know, there's people are starting to do this with more European style plants now, like whether it be the rose or something like that. I know people work with that, and then there's like Australian stuff as well. Like for example, I'm particularly interested in things like the red cedar and pine tree. But this again comes into, you know, how you develop that relationship and how you go about that dieting process. You know, are you going to go about it through, like, you know, like with the ayahuasca type thing? Are you just going to make it into a tea yourself and drink the tea leaves and just kind of set up your own little ritual and your own process with it? Are you going to go to a shaman and get them to facilitate you in some way? I think this kind of comes with the particular plant or tree that you're working with, and kind of the top context around it, and what your intention is. And then also the particular plant that it is, of course. Like it's like some it might be fine just to go about your everyday life and to drink the tea of the bark or the leaves or whatever. And others, you might absolutely need to be in isolation and to really like commit like a week or 10 days to going through that process. So that's kind of a bit of an answer on what goes on in South America, but also not really answering you, because it's kind of like a mix of cultures to kind of answer it in a good way. So yeah.
Cool, thank you. So how do you go about the one you're doing right now? You're in Australia, but it's a plant from South America, and you're doing it for a month. You changing your diet as well?
No, I went over last year and I did it for a month over in Peru. No, I'm not working with it from Australia. Yeah, if I at the moment I tend to my girlfriend's a herbalist, and so she makes up medicines. She also is like a shaman in her own right, if she wouldn't call herself that. But she facilitates blue lily, blue lotus ceremonies, and she makes a lot of tinctures from the plants that grow on the property. So generally, she will, if there's like if there's a plant that I want to work with and it's grown on the property, it's a sacred site here, whatever's calling to me, or sort of we'll make a medicine out of it, or technically she'll make it, but I'll be part of the process because she's a herbalist. And then it'll be like, 7-8 drops a day, and then I'll go until the bottle's finished. And that could be like a really simple plant that's totally non-psychedelic, like whether it be like a jacaranda tree, or it could be anything. So like like there's all kinds of like bushflower essences in Australia that I've worked with for a number of different things, like angel sword or like Illawarra flame tree, and like there's just tons and tons. And so at the moment I'm working with tinctures in that form. Yeah.
Nice. So you're able to get some kind of communication established, or it's more like an intuitive feeling of what they can be used for, or how they can be used in your own life or with patients, or how does it work exactly when you're in Australia?
Yeah, I would say that it's going to be different, because when you go to these places, like say you're in a place like Peru and you're in isolation and you're drinking like a dose of it, and you're also having ayahuasca ceremonies, and you're also going through a particular protocol, your senses are really heightened. At the moment, the process that I'm going through, I'm still working, I'm still going through my everyday life, I'm still just going into town and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not going to be as heightened, but it's a similar process. You're learning how to you're learning how to integrate and communicate with the plant. It's a similar thing. You just may not hear the messages as loud and clear as you will, or you may not feel as much of what's going on, and you may not be as sensitive to what's happening. But yeah, that's kind of like the best answer that I've got.
Cool, thanks.
I've got one more question, and we're coming up on time, so we can keep going if you're free, Nick. But I've got one more question, which is like back to sort of modern context of the world we live in, like with technology and AI and all these things kind of evolving on one side, and then also access to like plant information and intelligence, if you like. How are those two things going to kind of work together, or how can you use one to help you balance out the world we live in? Like for example, weed's been decriminalized for a while now in America, but it's super hybridized in my opinion. It's not the same plant people were smoking, so the effect's completely different. It's almost like sedating people. And I wonder what your thoughts are with like magic mushrooms now being decriminalized. Is that going to become a similar kind of situation where people just taking them and kind of losing their minds a little bit because they don't have the grounding and the context for that experience, and using it recreationally with drugs and stuff like I used to do? I don't think that was super healthy. It didn't really give me many insights. So how would you, like, what do you think is going on there? Why is it becoming available to people now? And obviously there's an opportunity for those who know how to use it, but also a downside or a risk. And how do you see that playing out for people? What to look out for, basically? What are the pitfalls there?
Yeah, great question. And I tend to agree with you in regards to marijuana and like about it being hybridized. And this is why I'm planting a lot of heirloom seeds here and growing things by like propagating them from the land. Not marijuana seeds, but like just like from the different things that we grow here. And I'm also interested in setting up a seed bank as well. For me, what I look at is the conditions that something's grown in, and obviously like if it's an heirloom seed, so is that what are the conditions in which the magic mushrooms are grown in? Is it grown in a lab? Is it grown outdoors in the sunshine? Like how's it being cultivated? Who's it being cultivated by? Like what's the energy? Like what's the energy of the land? What's the energy of the people that have brought it up? So those are the kind of things that I look to, rather than like just getting a certain quantity, like, okay, I'm going to have a 3 gram dose today because it's this chemical from this shop or whatever. It's far more important about the the environment that's grown from, and the type of seed and that kind of thing. I'll say in regards to and that's also like that goes to like how these different like psychedelic brews are worked with as well. Like how is like for example with the acacia, like I know of someone that will play the didgeridoo to the tree for 3 days before they harvest it. That's a whole lot different than just going down to the markets in some place in South America, even though it's not acacia, but like ayahuasca or whatever, and just buying it from somewhere. So it's like the context again of how these things are done. In regards to AI and that, I mean, I feel that these plant teachers are really good at some really fantastic keys into the natural world, into natural law, into what the natural flow of life is. I also believe that there's natural forms of AI and sort of the more, artificial forms of artificial intelligence, if you will. So that's kind of what we talked about in another call. Like a friend of mine calls it technical intelligence. But for me, it sort of like these plants are a tool that kind of connect us in more deeply with like the natural flow of life, the upward spirals, the kind of divine nature of it, and as our awareness increases, as our levels of perception become increased, we're able to see more of what's real. We're able to see what's more of in alignment of natural law, what's more natural. So when there are different programs, where there are different kind of artificial intelligences, when there are different kind of programs running, when there is different hijacks or different manipulations or thought systems or, whatever it may be, dimensions or timelines or, we can go as woo as you want with this, but like for me, it's kind of, this is why it's important to really deeply connect with these natural flows of life, and plants are just one way of that. And kind of, that's my answer, is that as you deeply connect with nature, as you do without the plants, just by being in it, you're then able to see more of what is not in alignment with that.
Yeah, I think what you said about having your own seeds and growing it is maybe like the key that I'm sort of realizing that I want to have more. When you talk about integration again, I want to have more participation in like the culturing of that plant, where it came from, the energy, the environment. And it's just the same as when you're eating meat, right? If you eat something that's raised indoors and fed shitty food, it's probably not healthy. It's a sick animal. You eat that meat, you're not going to be doing very well in 10, 20 years. That's pretty much how everyone's living. And if the animal's living outside, healthy, connected to nature, eating healthy grass, like getting a lot of sunlight, that animal and that whatever it's producing, that milk or whatever, that produce is going to be so much healthier and better for you, because it's part of life. And so anything that's connected to life and is healthy is going to do better for you. And then obviously you can integrate that like by having a relationship with the plant. And people, if you look into some tradition around people planting seeds, they used to even like hold the seeds in their mouths for a minute or two to let the energy from them kind of pass into the seed, and they plant it, and they're culturing seeds and plants that way. So I suspect you could do very similar things with intention with psychedelics and those type of plants. But I haven't gone down that path at all. So I'm just stepping into that direction.
Yeah, you're onto it. And, again, that can be, I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible. Like the reason why I'm using things like relationship is because exactly what you're talking about. If you're growing those mushrooms yourself from home, you're learning about the processes that they're going through their whole life cycle, or you're putting that seed in the soil. You're seeing it grow from the beginning, and you're a part of that process. Or if you're hunting an animal yourself, you're not just going down to the supermarket and buying it. You might be buying grass-fed, sustainably sourced, got all the spiritual tags under the sun, but you're really disconnected from, you're really disconnected from the process. Yeah, you can make steps towards these different things, like going to the local farmers markets and getting to know your local farmer and all of that. But part of the deepening of that relationship with these different plant teachers is by what you're talking about, and that's kind of going through the whole life cycle, being part of the process from the beginning, learning about what seasons it grows in, and the different parts and aspects to it. Because again, that's a whole lot different than just going and getting some mushrooms off your mate and going home and chucking them down your throat. Yes, like you can set intentions, you can have a ritual, you can have a ceremony, you can whatever it may be. You can go about it in all the right ways, but there's ways in which you can enter into that relationship with maybe a bit more reverence, or maybe like just even in a deeper way. And it's part of the process, right? Maybe the first time you really don't give a shit about going through the whole thing from scratch. Maybe you just want to, do a microdose of something and find out. But there's, it's just part of that that grand deepening, I think, and I think you're onto it.
There's definitely different levels. Like I don't think you need to start out like that just to get the experience or an idea of what's available. But once you look into it, if you really make it a part of your of your practice of your, you want to go deeper into these things. I think there's all kinds of ways of doing it. I just had an idea that came to me because mushrooms obviously grow on poop, and that's an example where, if you were growing on your own poop, what kind of mushroom would you culture? Like, you just don't know what the connection would be. Like, you have no idea. These are all things, no one thinks about, but there's just many ways to look at it. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, and like it goes. Like something I like to mention as well is that we don't have to keep ingesting these plants as well. Like, you can sleep with the flower underneath your pillow. You can grow it, at your house. You can walk past and say hello. We're not always going to be like directly in communion with these plants in a way in which, hey, I'm eating you, and that's how we get connected. As we start to get more telepathic or communicate in different ways, we're able to have these relationships in ways which aren't directly about harvesting it and eating it, so to speak. And we can just be like, they can just kind of be integrated into our everyday lives as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know. I've got one more question, but it's a bit intangible.
We're talking about plant medicines.
It's kind of what you're saying about the harvesting, and so like the way we harvest food today is obviously not very conscious, and that's having problems, and maybe just harvesting things always is like the predator at the top of the chain. Yes, at some level we do have that ability because we are pretty intelligent to be able to do that, but I'm curious like what your thoughts are with the food chain in this context of like plant medicine and intelligence. Like, there is a food chain somewhere in there, right? So who's the predator, who's the prey, what's going on there? How is that being used also by people, maybe like magicians, and through history of like predating on people by somewhat obscuring what's going on, hiding information from them, and then flattening reality with science, and then but still using magic and things that influence the world around you. Like, what is the predator prey dynamics of this world, this reality?
Okay.
And how do you figure out where you are in the food chain?
So, I'll say that you can ask the plants permission as well when you're harvesting them. And like I was saying, like with the guy that I know that works with acacia, he'll play the didgeridoo for 3 days. That's one way that he would do it, and that's through a communication with the plant. But then obviously, like you specifically asked me about plant medicines and the relationship between like the power dynamics. I'm just trying to clarify the question so I can give you a good answer. So it's kind of like, if you don't know what's going on, like what bad stuff can happen, or what are the foul things at play, what are the magic that you don't know about it? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at it, right? One is like how this information has kind of been used or kept from public awareness. So like there's that sort of predation on people of their energy and of their spirit, and of using these kind of tools. Like, it could be black magic, or it could be a sort of more collective level of like dumbing down information. So you like feed people religion and science, but you're actually using magic on them and other tools to kind of influence their realities. So there's all kinds of energies and forces going on all the time, and I think plant medicine could be part of that world. But there's hidden forces at play all the time, and there's predator prey dynamics there, because it's all about control and power. So we may be doing the same thing to like the plants and the animals, for example, and how we harvest them. But I think at energetic level, there's a harvesting going on. And so in that context, like, how do you think these plants or these tools are being used? It could be other tools, not just plants, but like black magic and, different cults, different Gnostic sects over time. Like, do you have any view on how that's connected into this context of how maybe this can help balance that cycle, if you like, of what's been going on? Specifically, like a dynamic.
Yeah, I can give you just some thoughts about all of that. I mean, we can say that the legal system, that making things illegal, can limit people's ability to access it, and people have been sort of disconnected from the land, like the wisdom keepers that have the knowledge of these plants. A lot of them have been separated from their country and from their connection with the plants as well. So their ability to share that wisdom, like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, there is a whole lot of just give me one. Just give me. There's a lot of women that are preyed upon, especially like for example, the easiest example is the Ayahuasca thing, where they'll go into those ceremonies and they get into trouble. There's what goes on of like what could be mentioned as like stealing diets. So for example, if someone goes through like the diet process and they gain some level of power, if like that's the sort of the easiest word that I have to describe it, some of the shamans there are able to kind of steal that power from the student or from the person dieting, because they have more they kind of have more access to know what's going on in those realms. That the person might be inexperienced. I think that throughout the ages, it goes without saying that or maybe not without saying, but like there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that these different cultures were using all of these different psychedelics. For example, in Egypt, the lotus is all through the pyramids. Graham Hancock's got his theories about the medicine bag in a lot of the depictions. There's depictions of mushrooms. There's the acacias. There's all that, like that's been on through eons of time. The speculation part that I have is that I think we'd be silly to assume that like different groups of people aren't using these different plants. I mean, I know, for example, like in Russia, they do all kinds of what the Western cultures would describe as being pretty weird. Like they have access to all kinds of psychics, and they I've read reports of psychics being in, boardroom meetings, and they kind of tell them that they're they're an ombudsman or something like that. But I'm trying to answer your question. I'm just trying to kind of nail it down. There's just shitloads of black magic. There's shitloads of people that would be aware of what's going on. There would be shitloads of people that would be manipulating it. There's people that know the true power of these plants. There's the people that know how to navigate these spaces. There's people that know how to astral project. There's people that know how to attack each other. There's people that spend a lot of time dieting to get more power and to use it against others. There's people that use it for all kinds of different reasons. And I think that's just part of the landscape. I don't really know how to answer it any better other than that. I know of like business crypto people that are going into like deep into these places that like to work with shamans because they want to like influence these different kind of layers of reality and kind of manifest large amounts of money and influence things and all that, and like they're super cultish, and like that's something that's really like obviously like not said, and people are going to be doing these things behind closed doors, so it's going to be speculation. And again, it comes back to like how integrated these people are and like the intentions of the people that they're working with, because it can be it can be used to attack enemies, it can be used for like love stuff, it can be used to cause people issues, it can and it kind of part of the process of having experience and wisdom and discernment and learning who you are and kind of learning how to have boundaries and to have a clear space and learning how to navigate is that you know who you are, and you learn and you learn how to create like this clear space for you, so none of those other things can affect you. But yeah, that's the best answer I've got, is that it's all happening, and but I like it's all speculation as well, because there's nothing specifically I can point to.
Yeah, that's cool. I was just curious in your
answer?
perspective. Yeah, I was just curious in your perspective, like what if you thought about that at all, like in your experience with doing this stuff. Like I shared on the mushroom show a few weeks back that I felt that the mushroom could show me certain things about areas of like energy feeding that had been happening to me, like by society, by
Oh
culture,
yeah,
by
yeah,
people. And that
yeah,
predator prey
yeah,
dynamic is just everywhere. So it's almost like it's an invisible enemy. You can't fight it if you don't know it's there, and it's always feeding on you. And different games are being played, and so the mushroom was able to show me a lot of areas where I could just see that. And then once you can see it, the game's up because you no longer give it your attention, your time, your energy, and it kind of loses its power over you.
yeah,
And I feel like these tools are also being used by people to gain an awareness on how to manipulate people. So I don't know, specifically mushrooms, for example, or other plants or other tools like black magic can be used to kind of keep people in a prey or victim-like state and disempowered. And I feel like that's going on at a whole level, like for probably millennia, from origins of religion and Christianity down to like science today. So I was just curious if you'd seen or had any experiences with that, or any thoughts on how that's influenced
yeah.
you.
So at the deepest level, nothing can harm you or nothing can manipulate you unless you give it permission to, or you give it the authority to. So you may have a contract in some realm that gives it permission. So that's something to be aware of. And like you say, these plants can be a gateway to opening your doors of perception, so you become aware of some of those agreements that you may have in place. But like nothing has the power to do that to us, because none of us are victims. We have like we have the ability to live our lives and to create it in a way in which is not influenced by those energies, so to speak. That being said, yes, absolutely. Depending on where you want to get with it, whether you want to call them energies or beings or aliens or entities or interdimensional forces or interdimensional empires, like all of that kind of stuff. It's really a languaging thing, and I really try and keep things as grounded and as integrated as possible. But absolutely, in those realms, there's all kinds of fuckery going on. There's like the shamans are using the power and the influence. There are business people that are using it to gain access to certain realms. People are, journeying to go into specific dimensions. People are going into different timelines. And I know you're sort of looking for more specifics, but it's kind of like, again, it's like where you put your energy and where and what kind of thought forms you want to feed. Because like it's I tend to not put my energy into, even though like I'm aware of a lot of that and have becoming more aware of like what's going on in my reality. Like I also know that like if there's some kind of entity feeding off my energy, it's only because I've given it permission to do so on some level, and that it's not necessarily like I'm the victim and something is happening to me because someone did some black magic thing or someone's trying to manipulate me. It's I have the power within me to create my own reality, and I don't feed that logos of all these kind of forces or black programs or governments or reptilians kind of trying to subjugate the human race to hybridize the humans and to use our genetics and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is, people have got all their own stories on all that kind of stuff. I just choose to create I'm very particular about where I put my energy, and so I understand it on a high level that there's like I can keep my energy field clear, and that there's no need to give like any undue attention and thought to entities, beings, and kind of all of that kind of stuff. If is that making a bit of sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is probably just misinformation kind of fed to keep people again in fear and disempowered. So I don't give it too much attention and energy as well. Like if I don't have a direct experience of it, then what's the point, right? Like you said, put your attention, energy, what you can cultivate, which is within, right? So that's a big part of my focus, is really just is looking within and spending time with nature myself, and that's real enough for me. I don't need to know all these other things or speculate on all these theories. But I think what the mushroom showed me when I was talking about like energy feeding on you, it's like just patterns of society. So for example, like working in London and giving half of your money up as tax, for example, is like half of your life force just being taken away. You can say you consent to it, but you're born into it, and if you don't have a choice or you don't know you have a better choice, you probably don't make one. So again, a lot of the awareness comes with just experience and time, but I think that mushrooms can kind of, or these plants can kind of speed up that awareness, that process of understanding you do have a choice, and then you can somehow give yourself back that freedom or take back that energy that you've been giving up to the system or the culture. And so I think a lot of the ways society works is a feeding off these sort of ignorance, and then cultivating that ignorance to just perpetually keep feeding on people and energy in different ways too, not just financially, but your health and all these other areas that people just don't understand how it really works. And so I think they're great teachers in that sense of just helping you to connect with yourself and ground yourself and really cultivate the energy within, and not relying on like substitutes. Because when you don't know how to do that, basically you have a sort of scarcity mindset, and then you're always looking for substitutes. So then they can feed you anything, right? They can feed you advertising, they can feed you insecurities, and then sell you something. And I think that type of energy predation is going on all the time. And this is something for me, I felt the mushrooms gives you a real awareness of, and it's like shows it to you very clearly.
Yeah, and I think as part of the process of becoming more aware of who you are and more aware of your energy field, and as those kind of doors of perception are sort of opened, if you will, then you start to understand more of what's going on, and then as you kind of can see more of what's going on, you're able to kind of know a little bit more of what you don't know that you don't know, and then kind of that's kind of where you can, like you say, you can shift that into it's a choice, and that you are not a victim, or you can once you see some of those kind of games or levels or energies, or the financial system or the political systems or the geopolitical arena, or the cosmic arena, or like the business, corporate, the patriarchal society, the technology, the EMFs, there's kind of there's like there's so much there, right? So like unless like and like you rightly said, like these plants can show us, it can kind of, like easiest way to explain it is like, if someone awakens to the fact of those things are happening, then they are able to make a choice about how to
participate or engage or not engage.
Yeah, exactly. But if they don't know that it's going on, then they don't know how to change their situation. And so it's kind of like a gateway into showing you sort of like an aspect of yourself that you didn't know. And then maybe it's not even society, maybe it's you, maybe it's an aspect of you, maybe it's a family pattern, maybe it's a childhood pattern, maybe it's a multi-generational pattern like you're recreating and you're not even aware of it, and it just sort of shows you, and it's not they or them. And I think that's kind of like important differentiation as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't looked too much into that. That's probably another show we can talk about. But no, I appreciate sharing so much. I know we're running over time here. I don't know if anyone else has any questions, but yeah, I got a lot out of that call, so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Yeah, hey, so welcome, man. Happy to share.
Was that Peter? You got anything to say?
Yeah, I said it was a good one.
Cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I guess we'll see you next week. Are you back on Tuesday next time, Nick? Yep. Awesome.
Talk more about the dark side.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot, mate. Appreciate it. We'll catch you next week.
All right, guys. Good to see you.
All right. Cheerio. Bye, guys.